Hi, my name's Michael Huntsman. I'd like to thank David Alexander, who is an inspiration to me and to many of us, to let people know about the restored Church of Jesus Christ. The title of my video today is My Pastor Paid for Leading Our Congregation? Those of you who have maybe never been to a church meeting of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, hopefully today I'll give you a glimpse into a little bit about what the congregation is like and the leadership of the congregation is like. So to answer the question, is my pastor paid? The answer is no. My pastor, called a bishop in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is not paid for leading our congregation. In fact, our bishop is a high school teacher and the head football coach at Kahuku High School, the Red Raiders. And bishops usually have a job, and then they lead the congregation at other times. On Sunday, during the week, they're available to counsel members of the congregation. The way that congregations in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is set up, it's done by geographical area. For instance, my ward here, a congregation is called a ward. My ward here is the Hauula 4th Ward, and it takes in an area in Hauula. There are other wards in Hauula. So there's a geographical area that takes in a number of neighborhoods that those who live in the neighborhood in the boundaries go to a certain ward. More than one ward can meet at a church building. So a church building, I think our church building has 3 wards that meet at different times during the day. Our ward currently starts at 8 a.m. Last year it started at 1 p.m. But there are a few other wards in the building that meet at different times. So it may surprise you that pastors or bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are not paid. When I was growing up, I lived in Sandy, Utah, and the bishops that I had throughout my life, I remember one that was more recent when I was a little bit older, was a bricklayer. And I actually worked for him during the summer as I earned money for college. His name is Harlow Wilcox, and when I worked for him, he was building a fire station in West Jordan, Utah, and I worked with him, and so that was his work, building houses and commercial buildings. And then he served as the bishop, the leader of the ward, on Sundays and at different times. Bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints serve usually for a term of 5 years. So they give up a significant amount of time. During 5 years, they serve week in and week out, leading the ward on Sunday. I say leading the ward, but they actually, we call it preside. They preside at in the ward. Usually, they don't preach a sermon. Other members of the church, of the congregation, are asked to give talks. So we've been in this ward for 2.5 years, and we've given talks at 2 different times throughout those months and those years. So members of the ward are asked to give talks. Sometimes it's youth speakers and others. So a congregation in the Church of Jesus Christ is called a ward. There are nearly 31,330 wards throughout the world. And each bishop who presides over a congregation, which is a ward, is not paid for serving. Some of the bishops that I had when in my youth, who served for a period of 5 years each, one of the first ones in my ward was Charles Alma Jones. He was his regular employment was a financial officer. Bill Wilson was an educator. Lynn Ellison was a healthcare administrator. Jay Olson was an an executive with Coca-Cola. Irvin Wade was an elementary school principal. As I mentioned, Harlow Wilcox, he was a bricklayer. Mac Griffith was an educator. Phil Jorgensen was a chief engineer for 23 years at Titan Steel. And Doug Denning was an insurance salesman. In the Church of Jesus Christ, a bishop is the leader of a local congregation known as a ward, with duties similar to those of a pastor, a priest, or a rabbi. And in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as I mentioned, they are not paid. Each bishop is assisted by 2 counselors. So our bishop, Bishop Carvalho, the head football coach at Kahuku High, and the bishop during the week and on Sundays and on weekends, he has 2 counselors, Brother Chandler and Brother Monotai. Together, this bishopric, it's called, the 3 of them are comprised of bishopric, and they oversee the spiritual and social needs of the ward members. The bishop helps each member of his congregation in our efforts to follow Jesus Christ. And then in addition to spiritual matters, a bishop helps members who are struggling financially or in other ways so that they can become self-reliant. And a bishop also oversees practical things such as records, reports, finances, and the meeting house where members meet. As I said, bishops typically serve for about 5 years. Bishops report to a stake president. A stake is a entity that comprises multiple wards, and the person that's over a stake is called a stake president. They also have 2 counselors who serve with them. So what does the New Testament say about bishops? In 1 Timothy 3 it says a bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine. That's interesting, not given to wine. What that means to me is that a bishop doesn't drink wine. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have a code of conduct as far as health goes, where we don't drink alcohol, which includes wine. It says, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house. And it's in verse 5 of 1 Timothy 3, it says, for if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? It says, not a novice. Usually bishops are experienced. They've had other callings in the ward. Both the men in the ward and the women have callings. Some of the women's callings are Relief Society leadership, young women's leadership, primary. The younger kids is called a primary leadership. So not a novice. They've had other callings in the ward and in the stake, usually before they become a bishop. Then it says, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without. So usually a bishop is well known in the community and in the ward, and he is known to be a good person. Not perfect, but at least working to do what's right. Then it says, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. So back to another thing in 1 Timothy, it talks about, or it says, not greedy of filthy lucre. So he's not leading the congregation and getting paid. He works hard to provide for his family, and also he serves, giving of his time and his talents to help those in need. So I wanted to read a personal history. I went to FamilySearch.org and I found some information about one of our former bishops in a ward that I was in when I was growing up, and his name was Orrin Greenwood, and his wife's name is Jenny. And here's a little history about him, and maybe I'll read about his history, his religious history. Maybe some of what he says here. He says, Jenny and I lived in the same ward, the Sandy First Ward, when there were only 3 wards in Sandy. So this is back in the 1930s, when Sandy was pretty far from Salt Lake. Now it's just a suburb of Salt Lake. But they were in the Sandy First Ward when there were only 3 wards in Sandy. It says we began dating occasionally in about 1930 and were married in the Salt Lake Temple on May 10th, 1935. It talks about them building their first home, and then he got into the business of building homes, and that's primarily what he did for his livelihood. He was a home builder. In the history it says we both have been active in the church, Jenny having served in almost every position that women are called to serve in, and has been a great teacher and leader and example. Okay, then it says I likewise, so this is Orrin Greenwood, I likewise have been active serving in various church callings. Also, I served in the branch presidency of the Grand Junction, Colorado branch. So in some areas, if there's not very many church members in the area, they have not a ward. They don't have enough members for a ward to have different leadership callings and stuff. So they have a branch, which is a small group before it becomes big enough to be a ward. He said, where we lived for 4 years. In 1948, I was called to serve as ward clerk. That's another calling in the ward that works with the bishopric. Then for the next 35 plus years, I served continuously as a second, then first counselor. So in a bishopric, one counselor is usually designated as the second counselor, and then the other one is the first counselor. then was called as the first bishop of the Sandy 7th Ward. The Sandy 7th Ward is a ward that was right next to the 8th Ward that I grew up in. But I think the Sandy 7th Ward was there before the Sandy 8th Ward. So he would have been the bishop of the home, the area where my parents lived. But it was the Sandy 7th Ward. He was the first bishop. I then served 1 year as a High Councilman in 1963. A High Councilman or High Councilor is a position in the stake. There's 12 High Councilors that work with the Stake Presidency to work with the wards, to support the wards. And I was called and set apart by Ezra Taft Benson. So Ezra Taft Benson, at the time of this history, he was probably a leader, maybe even an apostle in the church, but he did later became a prophet and the president of the church. So Orrin was set apart by Ezra Taft Benson as the first president of Sandy East Stake. So I grew up in the Sandy 8th Ward, and it was in the Sandy East Stake, which the stake was comprised of multiple wards, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 wards. And then he says 10 plus years later, in 1973, I was called and ordained as a stake patriarch by Elder Gordon B. Hinckley. In 1976, Jenny and I were called to serve with the first group of missionaries at the Washington, D.C. Temple Visitor Center. So, as you can see, Orrin, throughout his life, he served as a branch president, as a ward clerk, as a high counselor, as a patriarch, as a stake president, and a stake patriarch. And then he said, and then they were missionaries. Missionaries, they pay their own way. Senior missionaries, he and his wife served at the Washington, D.C. Temple Visitor Center, probably for 18 months to 2 years when they were older. That's 1976. So this is, 30, 40, 50, 40 years later from when he started this, talking about his church service. And then he said in 1979 we were called to serve as ordinance workers at the Salt Lake Temple. And then in 1981 he was called as a temple sealer by President Gordon B. Hinckley. And then he said, I also served as 1 year as a counselor at the Utah State Prison. So that's a little bit about one of the bishops in my life when I was younger. One of the bishops over our ward, Orrin Greenwood, and a little bit about his life, and he tells about the different callings that he had, including bishop. So you can see that some of the callings he had prepared him to serve as a bishop for 5 years over a ward, and eventually serving as stake president and stake patriarch, and then a senior mission, and then as temple ordinance workers. So members in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, both the female and males, and also the youth, they have callings where they serve and give of their time to serve others. There's many callings in the Church of Jesus Christ that I've had throughout my life that have prepared me for additional callings that I had later. Currently, my wife and I, we serve as missionaries at BYU Hawaii. We're actually professors here. I'm in the office in Hawaii right now, and my wife is an ordinance worker at the temple, and I have been an ordinance worker at the temple, but because of health issues I've had to stop doing that. But we serve as professors at BYU Hawaii. We pay our own way, and we teach a class here, and we help the students in our program with their internships. So we love working with the students at BYU Hawaii. There's many, I think there's 42 countries that have students from those countries here at BYU Hawaii, and we love serving here. We've been here for over 2 years, and we'll finish up in April. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of information that will help you understand more about the role of bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like I said, it's comparable to a rabbi or a pastor or a priest in other churches. And they serve, like I said, for 5 years, and they do it on their own time while working. And usually, I know Harlow Wilcox, they had at least 10 children. So bishops are very busy, both in their families and their community, in their work, and in the ward, serving the ward members. So until next time, I will find another topic that may be of interest to you to help you learn more about the restored Church of Jesus Christ. Until then, take care.